And the challenge with sales, procurement, and negotiation is it's not an isolated skill. So you have to try it with somebody. So the first challenge is finding somebody to practice it with. And then the second challenge is once you're practicing it, how do you know you've achieved it? And that really takes an observer. So it takes a third person. So basically, to practice your skills, you need three people. You, somebody to practice it on, and somebody else to act as a third party observer, to be looking out specifically for the skills that you're trying to achieve, for the techniques you're trying to apply. And those techniques, I mean, we'll probably talk about it, but for me, they're not little moments in a negotiation, they're micro moments.
You're listening to the Sales Today podcast, and I'm your host, Fred Copestake. On this podcast, we explore how sales professionals can develop a modern approach to winning business, the application of virtual selling techniques, how to create meaningful business relationships, and much more. Why not take our free collaborative selling scorecard to see how your sales approach suits today's environment? You'll find a link in the show notes. And welcome to this episode of the Sales Today podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Philip Brown. Philip is the founder of the Negotiation Club, which is all about negotiation, but in particular, practicing negotiation. So, Philip, welcome.
Hiya, Fred. Great to be here.
Well, look, we chat a lot. Yeah, so we need to keep all the internal jokes out of this,
Okay.
and focus on a couple of things that we've discussed in the past. And I thought I want to go a little bit more, and specifically, I want to do it for the audience, salespeople who will be thinking about these things in particular.
Okay.
And the first thing I know is very, very close to your heart is all about practice. Why do you get so excited about practice?
Why do I get so excited about practice? I think the reason why, okay. So I did a lot of sports when I was younger, a lot of sports, and I would go down and I'd train and I'd practice all sorts, a lot of rugby. And then there was a time when I actually ended up coaching the under sevens rugby team. So when you've got like 15 kids under 7 years of age, you've got to know how to keep them, entertained and at the same time learning. But in our professional lives, once we seem to get into business, there are business skills, but we never practice it, And I remember, sorry, I'm going to go on here a little bit, but I remember a couple of years ago, I went on a training course and I thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant negotiation training course. And I happened to mention it to my father after. I said, "This is a brilliant training course, And as a side note, my father used to teach negotiation skills, and he had a slightly different perspective on it, which is it was great that they got all this research, got into this detail and everything else. But the reality is people don't know even how to do the basics. It's the basics that people didn't know how to basically manage it in their own negotiation. So I kind of was thinking about the sports side of things and the repetitive practice aspect of it. And I was wondering whether there was a way of actually bringing that into the professional skills world. And because otherwise, from a negotiation perspective, the only time you get to negotiate is actually when you're negotiating, when it's a real world negotiation. And you've got no benchmark, you've got no, ability to determine how effective you've been other than to measure against your own expectations, which is dangerous if you're only measuring success by your own side. So I don't know, I'm wondering here, but the reality is that practice is something we don't do in the professional world. I wanted to do something about it. So 5 years ago, I set up the Negotiation Club. And the idea is to practice the negotiation skills. And for me, that has been a complete eye-opener, Fred. I mean, a real eye-opener as well, not just for negotiations, but for skills in general. We don't practice.
We don't. I think people like knowing stuff. I mean, I come across this a lot. I think people like knowing stuff. I've read 50 books this year. That's a popular LinkedIn post around December, isn't it? Or I've downloaded this cheat sheet, so I now know how to do this thing. It's like, no, you've got a bunch of
Ah, wait, wait,
words.
wait. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you just said you now know how to do this thing. That's a complete fallacy. That's false. You now know about it, but knowing how to do it, that's a totally different area of the brain. Brain wise, it's completely different. We go around with a lot of knowledge. We know how to play football, you know, but the reality is, there's a hell of a lot of skills involved in that. And to be able to be really, really good at it, you've got to practice it. So you develop part of your brain that actually knows, how to do this without having to think about it. It's the same with all professional
I thought you
skills.
might respond to that. But
Oh,
yes,
you're winding up.
but no, but when people do that, it's like it's. I've read the book, great. I'm not going to say don't read books. It's a very good thing people should do. Um, but it's take the stuff out of it, and implementation beats information. So if there's an account plan in the book, use the account plan. If there's a new skill in that, think about how you're going to apply that. And then, of course, that's what you're doing in negotiation world. It's saying, well, here are some of the skills, things which will crop up quite often. Let's practice it consciously, deliberately, so that when we need to use it, we can do it. Like a sports person working under pressure, having to respond to something, they've got that built into how they do it.
Yeah, but I think it's even worse in terms of people who read a book. And again, it's great. It's a great font of knowledge getting a book or watching something on YouTube or going on a training course. You're being made aware of the skills, of the tactics, of the techniques. Um, but it is such a mind-boggling distance between knowing and doing. And people want to run before they can walk, or even before they can crawl. And what I mean by that is, if you just take negotiation as a skill set on its own right, okay, and it covers, I mean, the same skills we're using in sales, same skills we're using in procurement, we're just packaging up as negotiation. But there are some very basic fundamentals that you need to be able to do so well. And sorry, but for the vast experience I've had now with teaching and training and practicing with people, is that people don't know the basics. So there's no point in almost reading some of these books. I mean, there's a great book out there. I say a great book, but there's a book out there on negotiation. We've all heard of it. Chris Voss, Never Split a Difference. And there's several tactics in there which, when you read about it, you think, oh, that's brilliant. That's great. And it's not to say that he's the first one to come across it. It's just that when you read it, it kind of makes sense. But actually trying them in a negotiation is so much, so hard. So when are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Are you going to do it in a real negotiation, or are you going to practice it? And if you're going to practice it, where are you going to practice it? Who are you going to practice it with? Because there's nowhere and no one to practice.
Yeah, you've got so much stuff going on anyway. The basics, the core, the things you've got to do well, and then a lot of his stuff, it's almost like icing on the cake. It's to make it more refined. It's to make it even better. But if what you're
I,
doing is all rubbish, or if it
I,
was
I,
good, but it turns into rubbish because you suddenly start to do your late night DJ voice or whatever it is, and the whole thing crashes down, that wasn't very smart, was it?
I don't, Fred, to be honest, I'd almost not even talk about the tactics really, or the techniques, because the fundamental issue for all professionals is just what I just said. There is nowhere and no one to practice with. There are places you can try it, real world negotiations, but when it comes to practice, and practice is having a regular, frequent opportunity to attempt these techniques in a safe place where you can get feedback as well. And the challenge with sales, procurement, and negotiation is it's not an isolated skill. So you have to try it with somebody. So the first challenge is finding somebody to practice it with. And then the second challenge is, once you're practicing it, how do you know you've achieved it? And that really takes an observer. So it takes a third person. So basically, to practice your skills, you need three people. You, somebody to practice it on, and somebody else to act as a third party observer, to be looking out specifically for the skills that you're trying to achieve, for the techniques you're trying to apply. And those techniques, I mean, we'll probably talk about it, but for me, They're not little moments in a negotiation, they're micro moments. They are literally the use of a word or the phraseology of a question or the period of time for a silence. It's literally a micro moment. And they all have an impact, but they all mean that we can practice them as well.
You know what? We've chatted a lot about this. And that thing about involving others, I don't think I've heard you say before. I get practice, but I often think because of sports, Johnny Wilkinson, kick in, got to be 10 goals on the road before he's allowed to leave the training pitch. It's on his own. Golfer, load of drives, load of putts, load of whatever, on their own. But if you're, I mean, you suppose you can practice silence on your own, but actually, no, even that doesn't work. Even that
No,
doesn't work because
but
it's the response that
but what you're
is
talking about,
something that's
so
happening. Yeah.
right, so what you're talking about there very much though is almost, I mean, they're isolated skills. If you're going to kick a ball, you don't really need anybody else on the receiving end. You can do that, you know, but you are literally practicing the run up, the steps, how you're going to lean back, how much effort you're going to put into it, what angle are you going to come at. And when you're going to practice for that, so if Johnny Wilkinson's practice, he's not just kicking 10 shots. What he does is he goes down and he just tries one thing to get one aspect of that kick correct. And there's plenty of ways you can do it. Some people have, you see him, how he does. He comes back, he picks a piece of grass up, throws it in the air, does that. Even if there's no wind, he'll do that because he's basically practiced the same move so often that he doesn't even have to think about it. Now, consider that with, the use of a mirror technique. Or we've talked about your technique, the one that you've done, TED, which I absolutely love, the questioning technique. Now, in order to really achieve that, you need to practice it. So for those who don't know, the way you describe this is TED, tell me, tell me. E is explain, and D is describe. Okay, but it's using these to draw out more information. It's a questioning technique, as far as I'm concerned. But if you're going to practice it, first of all, you need to practice it with somebody because you're literally trying to get information out of them. And really, if you want to improve upon it, you need a coach, or you need somebody who's watching, knows you're going to do it, whereas the other party shouldn't know you're doing it, and then be able to say, you know what, Phil, you timed it perfectly. You put the words exactly as they need to be. You took the pause and the silence exactly as it needed to be. The implication was that, but it's all about that one moment. It's one question. And then you've got to try it again. It's literally that tiny moment of incorporating a technique, and people don't do it.
Mm. And so the practice piece was the one thing I want to talk about. But you've already mentioned it. The second was this micro moments then, because what we're practicing are these things where they're going to shape the way the conversation goes. If I know how to use silence or TED or use of body language, something like that, because I practice them and I can decide what to do, that sends the negotiation in a particular direction. Or if I don't, it goes a different direction. So that's why you're getting so excited about the more of these you practice and you've got under your belt, then you can apply it and now you can have more of an impact on the shape that negotiation takes place. A pathway to results, I think you've called it in the past.
Yeah. So, you know, if you think about your conversations, it's literally a multitude of actions that occur and reactions. So and literally everything that occurs in that conversation, there's a reason for doing it. Even sometimes you don't even know there's a reason for doing it, but it's said for a reason. It's our subconscious almost fills in some of these gaps, and the real people are the ones listening to it. But there'll be an action. So somebody might ask a question. Okay, ask a question. Now there's a reaction to that. And whatever the reaction to that, it's either going to assist you in your pathway of negotiation. It's either going to add value. It might not have an impact that's discernible at all, or it could be negative. It could actually detract. Because sometimes asking a question is exactly the wrong thing you want to do. You don't want to ask a question, and there are certain types of questions that will actually undermine your position. But there's a moment. So a question is asked, there is a reaction to that. It either improves, makes no difference, or it reduces, it detracts from your negotiation. But you can imagine a pathway you're literally walking down, and there are literally hundreds of these, if not thousands of these. There may be the same one. You might come on a question, have another question. Maybe it's a silence. Maybe it's an observation. But the point is what's happening is that at every one of those moments, you can practice and you can be aware of the impact it's going to have. The vast majority of people don't. But the only way of doing that is to practice it with an observer as well.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, and I think you've actually put this as a diagram on screen before when we've been working together. It's almost like a neural pathway, isn't it? Where there's
Yeah.
like all those different options, and if you take left or right, well, then you're going down that, and then you get left or right again. So that, and it's, I mean, really, the better prepped you are and able to control, is that a fair word? Control that or manage it or implement it, the better the outcome potentially going to be for you.
Yes. Well, I mean, what's happening is people talk about preparation planning, but they often talk about the research and the analysis, the strategies, everything. They gets them all the way up to basically the starting line. So they do all of this preparation. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day about it. You do all of this preparation. And if you think about the preparation, particularly in negotiation, you know your position. They can be facts. You know that. But almost everything you have on the other party is assumptions. Okay, because you'll never know 100%. So there are assumptions. So you can do all this research. It gets you to the starting line. Now you have to engage. You have to communicate, whether that's written, whether that's verbal, whether that's video, whether it's in person. But you get to that point where you now have to have an exchange with them, which means that you now need to be able to, introduce yourself, explain yourself, set the conditions. You need to be asking questions, listening actively, responding appropriately, making proposals, knowing how to counter those proposals, knowing how to react to those proposals, knowing how to close those questions. It's all about that. So a lot of people focus a hell of a lot of attention on the preparation because in a way that's easy. But once they're in the negotiation, that's where they start to fail. That's where it starts to fall down because they haven't practiced how to actually engage and use that.
Cool. So if I summarize, so worst case scenario, you don't read any books, you don't do anything, you haven't got a clue what's going on. But I suppose at least you've got no idea what's going on, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Blissfully ignorant. Okay. Don't be that. Next, you read a book. Oh, you know some things. Great. But you've not done anything to apply them. Next level, you go into sort of, well, actually, I read the book, and one of the things it says, it's all about planning, preparation. So I can sit at my desk and I can do lots of stuff, and I can get ChatGPT to help me, and I can do tons of things. And so I've done a big chunk of stuff, which we know helps you be successful. But what we're saying is really where the rubber hits the road, that's where you are able to actually take those into the live scenario and use those. And if you're not practiced using those, this is where the wheels could come off. And to go with our sports analogy, it's like the team sort of sat there and doing whiteboards and stuff and team meetings and psychology and all this wonderful stuff. Never go on the pitch. Yeah, then when they go out, they find no one can catch. Don't know how to kick a ball, don't know how to do anything. And guess what? Disaster. Oh, why
You
did we
see it
lose? We had a really good plan. We had a really good week talking about this thing. Yeah,
you see it
there's
every
a
time.
problem.
I mean, you see it. You see it when football's playing. Everybody on the sideline. They're all they're the world's best refs. The referee gets it wrong every time. Everybody knows that the ref got it wrong. It's a totally different kettle of fish when you're on the pitch as a ref. Okay, we all think we're experts because we've seen it, because we've read about it. We must know more than the people who are doing it on the pitch. The reality is we don't. We kid ourselves. I
Yeah.
mean, listen, for those of you who are listening, if you're still listening, but for those of you who aren't, just ask yourself, when was the last time that you sat down with somebody, not in a real negotiation, not in a real sales situation, and you practiced one aspect? And I don't mean practice just once. I mean, you went back a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, to see if you're actually practicing and getting better. And if you've not done that, then I'm sorry to say you're doing yourself a disservice. You can listen and you can watch and you can read as much as you want, but if you are not setting yourself even half an hour a week aside just to try and get one aspect practice, one technique practiced, you're standing still. It doesn't matter how many books you read.
Pretty What's the word I'm going to use? I can't think of the word now because I'm not practicing this. um, no,
Brutal.
I mean decisive. Probably not the right word, but no, what you're saying now, it's difficult to argue with. I mean, I, I'd be interested if anybody wants to come back and push back and say, no, no, it's fine. I can absolutely assimilate all this information, and I can go and I can take it away, and I can fire it into what I do live. Not an issue.
Every child at school knows that practice is what they need to do, and that's not just practice on the sports field for them. The reason why they're at school is they're getting told a piece of information, then they have to practice it, mock exams. They have to go back with homework, keep practicing it, so that they sit an exam, they are then tested on their ability to know that piece of information. Okay, you have a training course. Okay, again, negotiation training course. All right, you don't sit an exam at the end of it. You've attended. You can spend 2 days and 10 grand on a training course. And some people think that because it's 10 grand, it must mean that they're better now. Harvard negotiation program, Schreiner Institute, Gap Partnership, Scott Works, brilliant training. I'm not saying it's not brilliant training. What I'm saying is that people are going along and then they think that's it. It's just the start of the journey. That if they have not set aside time every week, or at least every fortnight, not to practice everything, but to create a program where they're practicing one or two things, then that information, that course, that everything else, that just the return on investment decreases because you forget, you don't use it. And it doesn't have to be clever. My point here, Fred, is it does not have to be complex. It is quite literally taking a bit of time to practice one tiny moment. Get that moment right. You never have to worry about it again.
Um, yeah, it's not clever. It's not complex. Back to basics, fundamentals. People don't like doing that stuff, do they?
Well, let me get. I
Or it's not
don't think
appealing to people because everybody's above average. I don't need to do the normal stuff because I'm better than the average person. I think pretty much everybody would say that, which is
I
clearly wrong because you can't be.
it is clear. It's more than clearly wrong, Fred. I mean, I've been fortunate. You have come on, my taster sessions. I've seen you negotiate, and I've seen others negotiate. Okay, all right. There isn't a single person I've come across yet who hasn't been able to learn something from practicing. All right. There is always. I'm still learning. 30 years in procurement. Last 5 years, I've literally watched thousands of people practice in practice negotiations. Only 4 or 5 minutes, so they're practicing one or two things. I am still learning.
Uh, well, you have growth mindset, and many have. But I mean, the point I was making though is that when we talk to people about back to basics, fundamentals, that sort of thing, that will put a lot of people off who will say, "No, I'm better than that. I don't need that. I've been on a course already. I've done this for 20 years. I've done whatever." How how can we overcome that? I find this a real tricky one. Now, the most able and effective and successful people do not have that mindset, and they're like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, you always get something, and I want to keep my foundations really, really solid." But many are just like, "No, no, I want the spangly stuff. I want the double advanced. I
Yeah,
need
but
the
when
yeah."
you're talking about the successful people and that, you're talking about people who are already in business. They've already been doing it for years. They want their ego stroked more than anything else. The people who are going to have the people you can have an impact on in your business are the young ones, the new ones. I do a lot of work with students and with graduate programs, and the beauty of that is you've got literally young people who are keen to learn, open to interpretations, and already have that mindset of practice, because that's what the universities and that's what the schools are all about. That's what they already know. What happens is they go into work and it's a totally different mindset. It's a sink or swim. You literally get thrown into the job, and if you can't do it, then you just either disappear or they ignore you or you end up moving on. You've gone from that kind of learning to a suddenly where you're not getting that support. And I don't mean support in the sense of, right, you go on a training course. It's not about a training course. But if you have, I mean, again, to your audience, if you have a graduate scheme, or if you have an apprenticeship scheme, or if you have young individuals coming in to take over a role in sales, if you can incorporate a practice mentality where it is not about criticism. It is not about criticism. It's about a safe place to try things, to make mistakes, to learn from others. And you actually do that. I can tell you now, that will make an impact. You try and do this with senior managers, executives, not going to work. They're not interested. They're too busy, in all honesty. So you've got to pick the right sort of areas for it. They're, dare I say it, they're a lost cause. Senior management is a lost cause. You're not going to change them, okay? All right, it's like teaching, can't remember what the phrase is. Old ladies suck eggs. I don't know.
Grandmother. Teach your grandmother to suck
grandmother
eggs.
suck eggs. Yeah, yeah.
But no,
Grandmother, not
I
old
know it's
lady.
different. That is because your grandmother knows how to suck an egg and you can't tell her to do it any better. Potentially those senior managers you could get to do better, but they just don't want to.
They're not going to do it.
So, yeah.
But the shout out should not be to say that's not to say okay, give up on them. It's the point is to say, look, if you now recognize this as a methodology, then you need to be asking yourself, what are you doing for the next generation coming into your business? Because the other thing here as well is when it comes to negotiation, all right, negotiation is often um, an activity done behind closed doors in isolation. You don't get to see it. People don't get to watch it. And when it's done in the real world, you never know what the other party could have achieved. So if you can actually bring that negotiation into a practice format where you know what both parties have. I mean, negotiation cards is brilliant, but you know what both parties have. You have an observer. Now what you can do is you can bring that executive in because they will have certain skills. They'll have certain phraseology. They'll know certain things. And when they practice with the younger ones that are coming in, those younger ones can learn that. And rather than waiting 20 years for them to develop that skill, it will take them 20 hours. It'll take them, weeks, months. It's not going to take them 20 years to that, but you can actually filter that skill set down so that the senior people are sharing their information. Otherwise, yeah, you've got an exec. They know how to negotiate. What good is that to the rest of the people in the business?
Yeah. And that to me sounds like a way in which we can sell it. In that we're setting this thing up. It's very much for these people, but you can bring your experience along. Actually, when we do that, people can see it and go, oh, actually, note to self, that's something I have forgotten, or I don't do as well as I probably could. Yeah, we're not kind of hanging them out dry in that way. But
right. Okay.
yeah.
Here, the difficulty, of course, is it's very difficult to measure the improvements. Okay, we're practicing. All right. So there's only a few ways you can really do that. You could actually put your team into negotiation competitions. There are some professional negotiation competitions out there. Get them to enter these things. You could literally measure yourself against others in a competitive environment. Now that's one way of doing it. Get them into a club. I mean, I run the clubs, but they get them into the club. They can practice with others. Or there are certain things that maybe you can actually benchmark in your own business. So, for example, again, you may have a business where you're selling and you have a discount card, so maybe you can give 10% off, 20%, 25% off, 30% off. Okay. So you've already got these sort of fixed regimes on there. Okay. Well, what about using an odd number? Rather than going for 20%, how about going for 18%? How about going for 17.2%? Rather than going for 10%, how about going for 6.5%? Rather than go for 5%, why don't you go for 4.62%? If you go and actually, I mean, again, if you go and look at your results over the last years on the contracts, look at the discounts that you've given, and if you've got these ranges, have a look at how close they are to 10%, 20%, 25%. Now, if you did negotiate, if you did some practice and your individuals were then giving some odd numbers, you suddenly, you might be making 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% improvements just because they have the confidence to go in at an odd number. And you can probably see that. So your benchmark right now is that everybody gives 20% off. In 12 months' time, that could be all kind of odd numbers below it, but whatever it is, it's below it, which is the key thing. And that's a benefit. That's a value.
Yeah. Look at the package that you proposed, the solution. Look at what was agreed. Is it smaller and therefore cheaper? Or have they grown that by adding more variables and maybe even put the whole value of the package up and see how many times it happens, which is probably going to come with questioning, good trading, good use of a whole bunch of those skills that you've said. So
I had a digital company a number of years ago, and they submitted their tenders, they got through, then they had a negotiation, and I did some work with them. But they said at this stage, the client suggested that they wanted some discounts, and they literally turned around to me and said, "What we normally do is we just give a 10% discount." And I said, "Well, on what basis?" "Well, we just give a 10%." I said, "Well, why don't you think about and practice giving some odd numbers? So how about, stating and they literally did this, a 3.2% discount for a 2-year contract, 4.6% for a 4-year contract, and a 4.8% for a 5-year contract. They went with it, and the client agreed to it. And as it turned out, that saved them literally hundreds of thousands of pounds that they would have just literally given away by giving it as a normal 10%. They would not have done that without me suggesting it, but also them thinking and practicing it as well. And the client loves it. I mean, and then you think about it, and this is what really gets me sometimes, all right? You have 5, 10, or 20s, okay? If you have a 5 and a 10, you're automatically thinking of denominations in that number. But as soon as you start getting out into the point, it could be 4.5. Now, if I have 4.5, I'm not expecting 10 next. But if I have 5, I'm expecting 10 next. But it takes practice. This is, and it's just that one moment, one micro moment of saying one thing throughout the entire negotiation that is going to save you hundreds of thousands or cost you hundreds of thousands. And it's not the preparation and planning, because you can do all of that. You get up to that moment, and then you have to say it. And how do you say it? Fred, yeah, I'm really thinking like I want to try and start at, if we could, perhaps we could do 4.8%. Yeah, Fred, listen, if you can agree to a 1-year contract, we are prepared a 4.8% discount. Practice, practice, practice. It's the simplest of things that will make the biggest difference. And then if you want to get into the clever stuff from the books, that's fine. If you want to do the mirroring from Chris Wallace, have a go at it. All right. Whether it's going to make any difference, I don't know. But if you can't make a proposal, it makes no difference how many other techniques you practiced. Got to be able to do the simple stuff.
well, if you learn how to practice, then you can kick around whatever it is you want to play with. Yeah, let's try that. Let's try that. Oh, I saw this thing. Downloaded someone's cheat sheet. Did you? Okay, well done. Well, let's try this thing. Okay, let's see. Let's see if it's any good. Because we know how to practice. So we've got a formula. We've got a thing that we can do and kick it around and go, yeah, that's awesome. It's really useful. I can use that. Or, nah, don't really work, does it? Nah, bin it. Glad I didn't do that in real life.
I mean, you're going to get me wound up here. I mean, literally a cheat sheet. All right? Cheating. You are literally trying to cheat your way to being better. There is no cheating to be better. You cannot cheat yourself to mastery. There isn't a single champion, sports personality, or anything that have cheated their way to success. There's only one way in any skill that you're going to improve, and that's through practice, dedication, and regular and coaching and training, everything else that goes with it. It's not to say you need it. Everybody, plenty of people are quite successful in businesses, but it's highly competitive out there. And if you want to make a difference, sometimes even the smallest bit of practice is going to make a huge difference. But there's no cheating your way.
I don't think so.
If you have, I mean, they call it a crib sheet, preparation sheet, cheat sheet, whatever it is. But if that's what you're relying on to improve your negotiations or your sales, forget it. Forget it. You're cheating yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Look, I know you could talk about these micro moments long into the night, but that's what you're doing on your own podcast series, isn't it? I contributed one. I think you're working with a whole bunch of other people. They come along, they share one that they particularly like. We discuss how it works. We have a little practice ourselves, and it's there in the bank of here's some skills which you can go and you can have a play with. So where do people find you? Where can they get in touch with you? Where can they find out more about this stuff?
If from my perspective, if they go to the negotiationclubs.com, so it's plural, negotiationclubs.com, on that website, there's a whole lot of stuff on there. I mean, people can join a club, they can come along in a taster, they can ask some questions, there's a community, there's a whole load of things. And what you just referred to there, for example, is a podcast that we've started now, which is speaking to people in the real world who have used a technique or a tactic or have a tip. But rather than going into the full data, we focus on that. And the whole idea is you then take that out and say, right, how do we make this our own? Your example, the one we did with you a couple of weeks ago, was TED. As I said, it was just a TED questioning technique. What was great was last week we had a negotiation club meeting, and there was a couple of people there I could see physically trying to use TED in their practice negotiations. Now, don't get me wrong, they didn't get it right perfectly at the beginning, which is a lesson in itself. But the fact that they've tried it means that the next time they have a go at it, they're going to be slightly better, and the next time are better. So the negotiationclubs.com, we have a free taster. People can come along and practice. Well, anybody can do this. And we would certainly advocate for people to do it. Practice. Just find some moment. Find somebody to go and practice with.
Brilliant. We'll drop that into the show notes. I would encourage people to go and do that. It's we forgot to mention it's actually good fun. Whenever I've done it, I've got better, and I've had a giggle while I'm doing it. So it's serious stuff, but the way you go about doing it is pretty unique. And I'm not going to spoil it. People can go along and they can find out how. It's very clever, and they'll have a giggle. But thank you so much for coming along, sharing some thoughts. Hopefully, we've got people to be thinking about this a little bit different. They're going to think about practicing, and the kind of how that shapes conversation. So, Phil, as always, really appreciate having time to talk to you.
That's absolutely brilliant, Fred. Always a pleasure, never a chore. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. I hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please get in touch and hit subscribe. And remember, you can take the Collaborative Selling Scorecard for free to check out how your sales approach works in today's environment. You'll find it in the show notes.